So my name is Dana Gadican. I'm the Ag and Natural Resource Educator for Vigo County. This is our backyard, managing natural resources. I asked Bob to speak this week about pond management. And then next week, we're going to talk about managing invasive species in woodland. And then the following week after that, we're going to talk about reforesting like after you harvest lumber, for instance. So this week it's Bob. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves. For me, it's in my bottom left-hand corner, just so we don't have that residual feedback noise and it's not distracting for all of our participants. So with that and if you have questions, please write them into the chat box, which is in the center of your screen. And either Bob will see them or I'll remind Bob, and we'll make sure to cover them. So Bob, if you're ready, I think you can go ahead.
All right, so the first things first, guys. I suspect that some of you have already seen this program. Amber Slaughterbeck, your speaker next week, is doing this one with me starting this week. It's our Repelling Invasives program series that starts tomorrow at 12:30. It'll be an hour long. And it should be a pretty good one. As a lot of you probably already know, Amber is by far the best expert on invasive species that I know. And I put the URL in the chat box for you guys to see if you want to sign up for it. And if you can't sign up for it, you can always email me. And I'm going to put my email in the chat box right now too, just in case. If you're interested in that program, it should be a good one. Now to start off, so like Dana said, my name is Bob Bruner. I am a Purdue Extension educator. I work in Clay and Owen counties next door, and Dana and I work together pretty often. She asked me to help with this program today for a couple of reasons. One of them is that I'm an entomologist. I have a lot of experience with species in and around ponds. I've also been a pond ecologist. I've done research on ephemeral pond systems and a few other types of ecological variants of it. And one of the things that I have learned about ponds is if any single person can actually give me a definition of a pond, I will somehow find $1 million to give you, because I doubt you will find a very good one. The nearest I have ever been able to find is what you see right now on screen. Just the simple an inland body of standing water smaller than a lake. I would love to know if someone could define an actual scientific measure of a pond versus a lake. I think that's always the funniest thing to try to discover. Now, what I am doing here today is I've got two different slide presentations I'm going to roll through. Both of them are a little bit short, but what they are is that they are setting some basic groundwork on how you can use some scientific principles to understand what is going on with your pond. Now, the first thing that I want to stress, though, is that when you are attempting to recover or work with a pond environment, you have to have a definition of what is a healthy pond, and that definition is going to vary. Some people may just want something that looks pretty and has a few plants and a few living things, and you can just enjoy what it looks like. Some people want something that's going to house a healthy fish population, or some people may just want water, and that's it. All of these definitions require much different activities to be able to support them. Today, I'm going to give you that viewpoint from an ecologist's stance. So what I'm going to tell you about is what I see as healthy in terms of what is going to be a pond that has a diversity of life, what is going to be a pond that is going to be subjected to different environmental factors that may cause it to go through some of the things that we don't want to happen, like eutrophism and other things. And I'm gonna share a little bit of a secret with you. I hope you guys don't hate me for this one. I originally designed this for high school students, and I've given it to some high school students before. So I'm gonna take you to school for a little bit. Please don't take that as a measure of your capability. This is just an easy way to set a baseline. And if you guys have questions that go more deeply into the topic, please feel free to ask me. All right, so you see what the best definition of a pond I have is right there. Now, there are two factors involved when it comes to at least the organisms that exist in a pond, and you'll see later on how these organisms influence how a pond operates. The first set of them are pretty obvious: the photosynthetic organisms, the plants, the algae, the photosynthetic bacteria that exist within the pond's water column or on top of the surface of any body of water. The other part are the actual other organisms that are not photosynthetic, the animals, the insects, all sorts of zooplankton. And here I'm showing you a lovely picture of some Gray's tree frog tadpoles that are actually busy doing their work in the pond as well. All of these work together in a very, very critical and very delicate cycle to be able to maintain what an ecologist would refer to as a healthy ecosystem, keeping nutrients coming in, keeping nutrients down so that they're being used and they don't create circumstances that you might not like. And it also helps serve as a cycle to keep things cleaned up because there's going to be decomposition, and that's good. Ponds need that. The decomposition needs to be kept at certain levels. So first, let's just identify what is going to be the ecology of the pond. What's going to go into it? And I've mentioned animals already. You saw the great picture of tadpoles. We saw the picture of the plants that were involved in keeping a pond running. And I also mentioned nutrients. There are several nutrients that are going to be critical to life, and they're going to be just as critical in the pond environment. We want to make sure we maintain control over those nutrients, for better or for worse. And of course, the pond has to have water. How much water? How long can the water stand there? Some ponds aren't going to last all year. Some ponds may reduce down to virtually nothing when it gets around July here in Indiana. We refer to those as ephemeral ponds, whereas others may stand the entire year. And temperature variance. This is one that a lot of us who have less experience with ponds may not consider. Ponds have very, very tight thermal isoclines throughout them. What this means is that layers of water are going to have very specific temperatures. So if you're looking at encouraging things like fish to be in your pond, that temperature needs to remain very, very steady because fish are extremely sensitive to that. You'll even see their colors change, they'll become less healthy, or you'll get fish kills when a pond's temperature could be off by just a degree or two.
Bob, you're chiming in and out. So we're like, I'm not sure why, but you're there and then you disappear for a second. Well, your voice.
All right, how do I sound right now?
You sound perfect.
Okay, apparently I need to be much closer then. I'm sorry, guys. I will try to make sure that doesn't happen again. Okay, so did anybody have any questions? Something you may not have heard while I was talking about this previous stuff up here? I can go over it again, but if not, I can just keep moving. All right, I'm just going to assume we're okay, and if someone has a question, just go ahead and throw it in there. So what I just talked about is referred to as the biotic environment, the environment that includes the living things. Ponds also have an abiotic environment, the environment that includes stuff that have nothing to do with life. These are non-living factors within it. And I've listed on here several elements that are a major factor in that abiotic environment. Carbon and nitrogen and oxygen being the foremost of that. And if you guys remember your periodic table, you'll see the periodic abbreviations for those. If not, we can always go over those more later. These are considered essential nutrients, and several proteins and other things are also going to be a part of that essential nutrient system. Those are nutrients that the living organisms within the pond or any environment cannot produce on their own. So these are things that they absolutely must have. And of course, the water and the temperature are also a part of that abiotic environment. These will work together with the biotic portions to be able to keep systems moving, to be able to keep living things moving. And unfortunately, they are also typically the things that can cause a pond system to crash. And you guys probably have seen instances of runoff or other problems that have occurred that'll contribute to that pond's ecosystem falling apart. Now, when we talk about our living things here, what we usually refer to are the trophic levels they exist at. These are the stepped levels of organisms within a pond, and it talks about exactly what they do. So I'm going to go through those definitions really fast. So we talk about our primary producers. These are the organisms that are going to convert light into energy. Those are your plant or photosynthetic organisms. They are the basement food source for most of the things within any environment, especially a pond. The next level above that is your primary consumer. Those are the herbivores that are eating those primary producers. And then you have your secondary and tertiary, so on and so forth, consumers. These are the fish, the insects, and everything else that are eating other living things that may not necessarily be plant material. And of course, you have your decomposers, which are just as critical within a pond environment because they're helping maintain that nutrient level at a steady state. They're keeping the trash taken outside, so to speak. So why do I bring this up at all? Why is it important? Well, one of the reasons that you experience problems within your pond systems is because you experience what's referred to as a trophic cascade. This is when some function or some trophic level stops working correctly and it can no longer do its job. So what I have pictured here, these 4 pictures, are of organisms that belong to different trophic levels. And if we're going to create a trophic cascade, that means that I need to knock out one of the steps in this process to make everything else crash. So let's see what happens. Let's say I knock out the primary producer. That means that no plants are currently functioning. There is nothing there for the herbivore to eat. So that means our next step, our western horned rootworm in the bottom left, who are herbivores, they disappear. Well, now that I've knocked that out, that means that the predators, the things that are eating other living organisms that aren't photosynthetic, disappear as well. So we've lost our predatory lady beetle. The only thing remaining after that point is your decomposer that I'm representing here with a springtail. Now, what does this mean in a pond environment? Well, you know a trophic cascade has occurred when suddenly the organisms in the pond lose their diversity. And if you've ever had a pond that's gone really badly before, or another water source, you'll notice that it really only has a couple different living things, like maybe mosquitoes, or sometimes they're called wigglers, they're larvae that are in the water. Or you'll see something like bloodworms that still are there. These are decomposers and filtering organisms, and they can survive really badly polluted waters. And generally, when a trophic cascade occurs, they're going to be the only things left. That's why it's so important to maintain all of these diverse organisms within there. And of course, I labeled it. I always read about that. Now, some of the effects, can you guys hear me?
No.
You cut in and out. So I think it's when you face your right side.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, guys. I think I need a new microphone too. All right, I will try to look more directly at the screen. Okay, so one of the effects of a trophic cascade that we're going to experience is unwanted or excess vegetation. And this is because one of the things that can cause a trophic cascade is an increase in nutrients in your pond. This will allow plants to develop out of control. And you can see that here represented pretty well. We've got a lily pad here. We've got some other small plant organisms. We're going to show you what those look like. So one of the ones that often gets transmitted very, very easily from pond to pond and takes heavy advantage of excess of nutrients is something called duckweed. And it's just this tiny little leaf-like shape. And when it occurs, it's got its own very tiny little root system attached to it. Go rooted into the ground, it just stays floating on top of the water. And if a bird or a fish or a boat goes through the water and then moves to another area, it spreads the duckweed around. Another one that you'll see very similar to duckweed, but much tinier, is something called water meal. You can see this bullfrog right here just covered in water meal. These two plant organisms can take advantage of the nitrogen sources and create their own kind of trophic cascade. When they cover the surface of the water, they're blocking out sunlight, they're reducing the dissolved oxygen in the water because they're absorbing it up just so that way they can grow. And they cause basically a great big mess. And this is by far one of the most common questions I get about ponds in my kind of work. Every year, someone is going to contact me about, I have duckweed, I have water meal, how do I get rid of it? And I mentioned before, it gets very easily transmitted. So what I want you guys to do now is to help me be responsible stewards about our environment. Make sure that if you have any kind of water sources that you work with that has this stuff in it, any tools, any clothing, Any boats that you use, please make sure they are clean before you put them in another water source. This unfortunate crane right here is just going to fly off to another pond to look for more food, and it's going to transmit it as well. But unfortunately, the crane isn't very good at taking care of the environment. It just wants some fish. Now, I've been talking a lot about excess nutrients. Now, the most common excess nutrient that we deal with by far is going to be nitrogen or some kind of nitrogenous waste, usually in the form of runoff, either from an agricultural activity or from human habitation. And what you see right here is a researcher who's currently looking into what looks like a cyanobacterial bloom in this water source. That bloom is occurring because there is so much nitrogen in this water source that it just explodes all throughout the surface. We call this process eutrophication. That means good nutrients, and what it is just simply that. Too many good nutrients are now going into the water source, and it's creating a situation where all of these plants and all of this bacteria can develop. So how can we try to avoid this problem? It depends. If you have an already existing pond, some of this part may be a little bit difficult. This is some that goes towards if you're considering putting in or moving a pond. Build away from cultivated areas. Don't put a pond next to a farm field, or at least on lower ground compared to the farm field when you know runoff is going to happen. If you already have a pond in place, try to control the directionality of that runoff. There are lots of different land structures you can put in to make sure that that runoff doesn't necessarily move into your water source. It's not perfect, but it helps. Another one is to consider your drainage and your intake. And this one is by far one of the more common issues that I run into. People have ponds that have existed on their property for years, whether for livestock or something that they enjoy, just like their own aesthetic purposes, but they don't put in a drainage, or the intake is very low. Make sure that you have very, very well taken care of, clearly established drainage, like a natural spillway, or even just a standpipe, so that way you can make sure that water keeps moving. Another thing to do is to consider how the irrigation for this is going. If you're going to keep the water moving, does this body of water have a consistent inlet? Is there water flowing into it? Is there water flowing out of it? If there's too much water, what can you do with it? You want to make sure that you maintain control over how much is there. Sometimes when it gets further into the summer, that water is going to go real low, and that's just unavoidable. That's just life in Indiana. But for the rest of the year, you want to make sure that you have consistent controls over what is going on there, how quickly is it filling, and heaven help us if we have another flood event. That way you don't experience a giant inrush of sediment. Another strategy you can try using, and this is more aimed towards fisheries, but it can help with existing ponds on people's properties or in park systems, is some kind of land structure like a berm, a dam, or a levee. Putting these land structures in place will help you avoid a lot of those really nasty flood incidences. You can use them to build up a stronger shoreline to help you protect what's already there and make sure that that shoreline isn't just breaking off into the water. It can also control the inflow of different invasive species, because if there's a flood event, that means that any invasive species that are in other places aren't flowing into your system, other fish, other plants, so on and so forth. One of the strategies that we usually see used is the installation of an aeration system. This is normally done by a pond management agency. Usually you're buying their technology and you're also buying their services to be able to put this in. And all it is just like a bubbler inside your fish tank, just on a larger scale. It helps put oxygen back into the water, and it keeps the water moving. You'll note that I keep talking about keeping the water moving. That way your pond doesn't stagnate. If a pond goes stagnant, that means you're developing more nutrients in it. That means you're losing oxygen out of it, and you're just going to end up with an algal bloom eventually. Aeration will help control that. And I should say that none of these strategies are perfect. None of this will be a silver bullet for your problem. Normally, it's going to be a combination thereof, and you're going to be doing it for the entire time you have that pond or that lake. Now, here's some of the bad. These are some of the things that we deal with when these aren't being done. You can see here, this is a great picture of an algal bloom. This is some lovely algae that's developed on the surface of this pond. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before. It'll probably get pushed around the surface until it reaches various corners or various sides of the ponds and just build up there and be unsightly on top of it. This is going to be one of those things that'll tell you, I have too many nutrients developing in my pond. I need to do something. You can also see that it's not very rooted. In this case, this type of algae is just sitting on the surface and being pushed around. So manual removal is something that you might consider if you're wanting to get rid of this. There are a few chemical products you can use to get rid of it, though I know a lot of people are a little bit loath to do that. Before you use any chemical product, you need to make sure that what you're using is labeled and it won't impact the other organisms in your pond. And like I said, sometimes physical removal may be the best option there. This is actually an image that comes out of China, where one of their coastlines has a serious algae problem. And I think you guys could safely agree with me that, yeah, that's pretty serious, right? I sincerely hope none of you have a pond that's quite that bad. Some of the people over in Asia believe that this actually has therapeutic qualities to it, and they will bathe in it. I can't say if that's true, but I don't think that's an experience I myself would want to have. I'd rather have my seaweed be in my sushi and not in my lake. And like I said, there are several chemical options you can use. Reward is just one of the many options that exist out there. I want to encourage you guys, before you make decisions to put chemicals into your pond, talk to an extension educator, hire a pond management agency. Get professional help with this. It is very easy to put a pesticide or some kind of light-blocking agent into a pond and generate a fish kill. And that is not what you want to have. So please read the labels on these things, contact us. It is our job to help you with it, and considering hiring professional help to get it done. Yes, it's expensive, but unfortunately that's just what goes into managing your pond. One of the other issues, and this I typically see more with livestock ponds than anything else, or ponds associated with agricultural activity, is erosion. You want to make sure that your shoreline is strong and stable. We have a lot of pest organisms that can erode a shoreline. People will complain about cattails. People will complain about muskrats who will destroy shoreline structure. And eventually you will get an incident not unlike what you're seeing now in the picture. The most common one is simply seeing the sediment from your shoreline enter into the water column, and the pond will just suddenly go from a nice smooth cup or dip shape, and it'll just slowly fill in until eventually you kind of lose your pond. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. You want to manage that landscape. Just as important as the living things in the pond are, it is equally important to manage the things at the shoreline. You want to have a nice, diverse group of organisms that are planted in that area. There are lots of native, aquatic, or riparian plants that are going to give you that healthy landscape right there to keep that shoreline stable. You want to make sure that the inputs and outputs are being controlled, like I already said, and if you diversify that plant life and use native plants, they will help filter everything that is going in and out of that pond. They will do two jobs for you. That's why they're so great. You're going to want to manage the other wildlife that's going to be around that pond. You don't want a ton of deer stomping down all of the vegetation on the shoreline, because that's going to help erode your shoreline. You want to make sure that you've got some kind of management in there to prevent that from happening. Okay, so that is the end of the first slide set, like I promised. Now, do you guys have questions on that portion of it? Because the next thing I'm going to dive into is I'm going to be talking about how to use macroinvertebrates to monitor the health of your pond. So you guys know everything I'm talking about here. You're absolutely confident you have got this.
I have a question, Bob.
Yes, what is your question, Dana?
How do you feel about people mowing around their lawn? Mowing around
Oh,
their pond. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
oh, that has so many terrible yet good things too. So bush hogging or mowing around a pond, sometimes you need or want to do it just depending on what you're wanting out of that pond. Sometimes you just want to be able to see what's there. So you're going to have to make a little bit of a rough choice there. You're going to have to decide what's more valuable to you, the aesthetics of the pond or maintaining its health. Because if you choose to mow around it, a lot of those grass clippings and other things will eventually go into the water, and that means you're putting nitrogen and other material back into the water. You're creating that situation that you want to avoid. But at the same time, it depends on what you want out of it. Generally, I would say from the ecologist standpoint, don't mow around your pond because that means you're going to cause some kind of eutrophic incident. But sometimes that may just be what you want out of it. So if you choose to mow, do not let any of the clippings from what you've done enter that pond. And keep in mind, you are opening up easy pathways for lots of different organisms to get there. And you may be removing some of that filtration system that plant life is going to give you. So that means you're going to have to keep a closer eye on the nutrient inflow and outflow through the pond. Does that answer your question, Dana? All right. Okay, so one of the easiest things to do, oh, someone said something in chat here. My husband is big on spraying the algae, the stringy algae, with an aquatic spray. So what you're most likely talking about, Lily, is an incident of horsehair algae, which unfortunately, yeah, that's one of the things that you just have to do with that. Horsehair algae is very difficult to remove. Oftentimes, manual removal is one of the better ways to handle it, but it is a lot of very backbreaking work to try to just rip that stuff out of the pond. And sometimes an aquatic pesticide may be the option to use. Sometimes dyeing the pond may be an option that you have to consider. That is one that I would sit down with your extension educator or pond management agency to talk about. So that way you have some good information that is based on your particular situation. The reason I'm being more general today is because a lot of these ponds have very particular situations, and it's just hard to create a good suggestion just from that alone. Let's see, someone else said, our pond is in a wooded area and gets a healthy load of leaves in the fall. What should we expect to be managing because of that? That's a very common one, Aaron. And I know a lot of my residents in Owen County often deal with that. You're going to want to let a little bit of that go in because those leaves, a pond does need some nitrogen. It needs some input there, but you don't want a lot of leaves to go in that pond. If you see the entire bottom surface of your pond getting covered with leaves, that means that probably nothing else is growing in that area. You might want to consider cutting some of the trees back. You might want to consider some tree removal around the shoreline, because if you get too many leaves, they're going to decompose and it's just going to be putting all of that material out into your water column. Sometimes that can be good for some of the organisms that live there and some of those organisms we like, but just like with taking your vitamins, sometimes too much of a good thing isn't necessarily helping you out.
Bob, wouldn't that also raise the bottom of the pond if like year after year after year the leaves fall down?
Eventually, yes. Eventually. That would take a lot of time. The more pressing issue to deal with there would just be the influx of nitrogen that's coming. And also those leaves, they're putting tannins and other things into your water that sometimes our organisms just aren't able to survive very easily. Is there a list of pond management professionals available somewhere? Dana probably has one that she can send you. I would need to check to see where mine is. Unfortunately, working from home has cut me off from some of the resources I normally keep easily on hand. There are a few lists. You might consider looking at the Purdue Ed Store or looking up some Purdue Extension publications too to see if there's anything like that. And also there should be just a few online resources you can look up through some Google searching too. Unfortunately, the times right now make it a little difficult to produce things like that, but we can try to find something for you. I definitely recommend talking to Dana a little bit, and she and I can work together to see if we can find something. Okay, so you're very welcome. I'm going to keep moving here. So I'm going to get into my favorite part of this, and I hope you guys like it too. I love my bugs and my crazy little organisms and ponds, and I'm going to talk a lot about them. What we're going to focus on here is I want to help you guys learn how to monitor what you have. Now, my understanding is that some of you belong to a local club that's trying to recover some of your landscape right now. And what I want to do is give you some tools to use to monitor your pond. These are just some easy things that you can watch for. You can even measure and see how many you have. And that will kind of inform you as to what the health of your pond currently is. Now, we refer to these as bioindicators. These are living things, organisms that are going to signal to you what the condition of an ecosystem is, in this case, ponds and lakes. These can tell you if you have from an ecological standpoint, a good system that is healthy and producing lots of diverse things, or a bad one that's only producing just a few organisms. Now, I am going to work off of the assumption that you guys are wanting to diversify the life in your pond, because in general, that's just going to make it more resilient. It's going to make it be able to stand up to changes much more easily. And I'm going to share a few of those with you right now. So this is one of my favorite ones. I mean, who doesn't love dragonflies? These things are great. They eat insects that annoy us. They're also big indicators of healthy environments. Right now you're looking, I believe, at a pond hawk, though I'd want to double check that. So dragonflies will exist in oxygen-rich environments that have a lot of food. And you are looking at, right now, an immature dragonfly. It is taking oxygen out of the water. Its gills are actually located towards the back of its body where its rectum would be. There's actually a surface area of cells that are taking oxygen out of the water. And these are great predators. They will help keep pond environments healthy. They're ambush predators. And one fun fact about the dragonfly, if you look at its head capsule, you can see this kind of elbowed limb underneath its head. This is actually its jaw. Its jaw is extendable. It'll just shoot that thing out at small fish or other insects and bring it to its mouth to actually eat them. So these guys are just fascinating to me. Like I said, they need very, very clean, very healthy environments. So if you see lots of dragonflies and damselflies going around your pond, that means you're in a good place right now. At least it looks like you're in a good place right now. Damselflies also serve the same purpose. These are those smaller, what looks like a dragonfly, but much smaller, and they fold their wings over their back. They serve the same purpose as a dragonfly, and you'll be able to see them in the water because they have these unique little three-finned gills coming off their back end. They're also great predators. They need good oxygen, but just like fish, they're going to be taking that oxygen out of the water. This is my own little science fact. I apologize for sharing it with you, but I have to teach you something, right? This is one of the most ancient groups of insects. We found plenty of fossils of them. They are widespread across the world. They are completely carnivorous, and like I said, they require very clean water. So they're going to act as a food source for fish and other insects, and they're going to be predators, helping keeping populations in the water down. Another organism to look for in your water is something called a back swimmer. This is a little insect that you're going to see on the surface of the water, except it's going to look like he's swimming upside down because he essentially is. He is just under the surface. He also requires very clean waters because he's one of the things that's going to go after things that are landing on the surface. He's going to be controlling the mosquitoes in your pond, and they're great at that. And they require water that's going to have a good source of oxygen to keep those mosquitoes there. Water boatmen is another good insect to look for. They kind of look like a back swimmer, but what they are is they're a decomposer and a plant feeder. They also require very oxygen-rich environments because the plants that they feed on require that. They need good sunlight, they need clean waters, and those water boatmen are taking advantage of that. So these insects that I just talked about, the back swimmer and the water boatman, these are insects that have piercing, sucking mouth parts. We refer to this as a rostrum, and they drain food from the inside of whatever organism they're currently hunting, be it a plant or animal. It's a very widespread group. And while they can exist in lower qualities of water, they're going to prefer the cleaner ones. So let's put that into perspective. We know that dragonflies and damselflies require very clean water, and we know that back swimmers and water boatmen prefer clean waters. So that means if you're seeing both of these groups, you've got fairly clean water. You've got a good, healthy system. But if you're only seeing back swimmers and water boatmen, that means that your water is somewhere in the middle there. It may not be as clean as you would like it to be. It may not have as diverse a life as you would like it to have. There's also a huge plethora of aquatic beetles. And some of these things will look a little odd or a little scary, but aquatic beetles are one of the best bioindicators for a healthy system, short of some of the other ones we're going to go over momentarily, I believe. These are all predaceous diving beetles. Some of them will do some scavenging. They are great. They will eat tadpoles and all kinds of other things that are in your water. And if you see something like an aquatic beetle, like a predaceous diving beetle or a water scavenger, you are in really good shape. I have seen ponds that are pristine, that have tons of these things. They act as great food sources, and they will help serve that same purpose that a dragonfly will in the water. Unfortunately, their larvae are not the prettiest things. They will look a little scary. I would definitely say if you see the larvae, don't try to handle them on your own. If you find them in the water, they will bite you too. They are not very discriminating, but you want them there. Here's a great picture of a predaceous diving beetle and its larvae. Okay, so I kind of went over all of this. They're all, like I said, voracious predators. Don't poke them. You should be fine. So here's an example of what you don't want to see, and you can see how it's having an impact on some of the organisms, because if you look in the lower left, you can see some turtles right there. And those poor little turtles are getting covered in just all the plant life that's gone out of control. And this also acts as its own bioindicator. If you see other organisms having problems in your pond environment, you're going to know that there is something up. And you can look at all kinds of different algae and things that are going to start growing on other animals or other plants, and you can use that to inform you. Now, some of the things that represent when your environment might be going a little bit wrong. And we all hate this one, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can exist in clean water, but if you're seeing thousands upon thousands of mosquito larvae, the little wigglers on the surface of the water, you have got a problem happening. Mosquitoes do not take oxygen from the water. They take atmospheric oxygen. So they don't need a clean system. And in fact, the more nutrient-rich a system gets, the more they like it, because they're filter feeders. They're just going to clean that out of the water. And here's just a great picture showing what they do right here. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before in some of the pond environments that you've been around. What's really neat is you can see that little horn on their tail. That's what they poke up through the surface of the water to take in atmospheric oxygen. And another thing that's also kind of neat is that you can see right in the top middle there, just underneath where it says mosquitoes, there's this kind of round object that's curled up. That is a mosquito that has gone into pupation. And it still has breathing horns on its surface, and it'll poke them through the water. And eventually it'll hatch out into an adult and just fly straight from the water up into the air. Bloodworms are also another indicator that there is a problem happening. Bloodworms are, their adult form is usually referred to as a midge. They're also blood feeders. Bloodworms are referred to that particular name, though, because in their larval stage, they're still filter feeders, but typically they have this red color to them, which is where they get their name. And you'll see them used pretty often as fish bait, amongst other things. But if you see a lot of bloodworms in your pond, you have definitely got a problem. Bloodworms love the least healthy environment. They don't need it to be clean. And they will just eat up all kinds of nutrients and other things from that water column. And of course, I talked about all that already. So some of the other indicators that you can use, and there are a few others I'm going to talk about here, because I think I forgot to put those slides in. Sunfish. Sunfish are good indicators of environmental quality. Now, the most common version of a sunfish that you find in Indiana is probably going to be a bluegill. While it's not a labeled sunfish, it is part of the same group of fish, it's part of the same family as cichlid, and they very clearly indicate when something is happening. If you look at the bluegill in your water and they have that nice, healthy color that you usually associate with them, that means that the environmental conditions are going great and they love it. But this guy right here, you can see that his color has shifted. He's showing yellows and he's going pale. That means that he is under an environmental stress right now. These guys are great because they are quite literally a living barometer for what the conditions are in that pond. And sometimes all you have to do if you want to see what's going on is just take a line and a pole out there. Pull a few sunfish from the water. You don't even have to keep them there. You can throw them right back. And you can get a great idea of what those conditions currently look like. All right, so yeah, and one of the great things about this too is that a weed behind that fish. You know what? Let's see. That looks like it is an algal development. Now, here's the hard part though. You actually bring up a really good question, Aaron. Saying something is a weed in a pond is really subjective sometimes. Ponds need algae and plants to grow in them to provide habitat for fish and insects. They only become a weed generally, and there are some exceptions, when they start to grow out of control, when that eutrophic reaction begins to happen, when that trophic cascade begins to occur. In the case of this sunfish, what they're doing is, judging by the way the ground is flattened in that picture, most likely they're trying to create a nest so that way they can lay their eggs. But I'm guessing that the environment in the pond is going a little bit wonky and they're starting to show signs of stress. All right. Let's see. Oh, I thought I had a few more slides on that one. That's okay because there are a few other bioindicators and a couple other things we can mention. Man, there is one other one that I thought was on this slide set and I really wanted to show you guys, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up. But let's see. Does bloodworm do wonderful things to the soil? Again, that can be a little bit subjective because the bloodworms will do some things where they'll help get organic material back in the soil and they will consume organic material out of it. So they'll offer a level of control for that nutrient. But the trouble is that when they start to thrive, you're running into that problem area where there's a bigger fish to fry, so to speak, and the pun is totally intended right there. So yes and no. You're going to want to use, I use them personally as the bioindicator, but they can give you a little bit of benefit. But normally they're just going to indicate something else is going wrong more. Okay, so here's some great pictures of this. I think I had my slides a little bit switched around. So we were just talking a little bit about plant life. Those algae and those flowering plants provide shelter, they provide a food source, and they create these interactions with organisms to help them be able to survive. So whenever you're trying to manage them, you want to make sure that you're still leaving something there. You don't want a pond that's devoid of plant life in the water column or on top of water. You just want it under control. And that, again, is going to be really subjective. For example, the horsehair algae that I'm showing you right now, I don't think any of us would say that that's something that we want to see on the surface of our pond. That is a bad situation. That is out of control. But we do want a little bit of life there because not only is it aesthetically pleasing, it's also great to just have that habitat there. Let's see, Lily asks, are there plants you would recommend adding to a pond? I have thought about water lilies. So what I'm going to do is, as opposed to suggest particular plants, I'm going to beg this of you. Check to make sure that any plant you choose to put in your water, you guarantee that it is first a native of Indiana, and second, that it is not an invasive species. Please, please, please do not put something that you've gotten in an aquarium in your pond. That is the cause of some of the worst problems that we've ever had. And the other thing is to monitor for any invasives that we could potentially see erupt. Dame's rocket, I believe, is one of them. Purple loosestrife is definitely one of the invasive species that could occur around your pond. People will sometimes leave them there because they think it's pretty, but the trouble is soon you'll just have this great wall of purple that will choke out all other living things. And remember what I've been saying today, nature abhors a monoculture. You want diversity. For example, what you're seeing right here, some of the water lilies and shields that you see developing here, there are a few of them, and they are going to block some of the sunlight, but there are only so many, and they are creating an environment that has habitat that is providing a lot of surface area for living things to work on. If you look closely towards the middle at one of the lily pads in the picture, you can actually see there is a frog sitting on it right now. So that is a good situation. That is something that I would love to see. But you're going to want to make sure, again, like all other things, you monitor that. You monitor what's coming in and what's going out. You don't want any of this to go out of control, because any of them, under the right circumstances, can become a major problem. Let's see. Oh, this is just some neat information about carbon sequestration. I can always talk about that at some other point. So we've gone over a lot of the negative impacts of excess vegetation, and you guys are probably already familiar with them. They can impede your recreation, they can block your sunlight, reduce your oxygen. They can cause other organisms to begin to appear that you don't necessarily want. Sometimes snails aren't something you want, though it's very typical to have them. Like, again, a few of these are great. It's when they get out of control that they become a problem. And of course, just the overall reduction in water quality. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention here, oh, here's a great picture, are invasive species. This is what happens when you have too much of something that you think is pretty. This is what happens when purple loosestrife gets out of control around your pond. This is a situation that none of us want to see. A lot of people will think, hey, this is habitat and it's pretty, so I should keep it. But the trouble is, it will just spread everywhere. Anytime you have a bird land near there or there's a flood event, that is going to get spread to other ponds. Okay, here was the last part that I wanted to mention before I just let you guys have some time for questions. Algal blooms and cyanobacteria blooms are one of the biggest problems that we deal with. Our own Great Lakes have been hit by this. This is an aerial picture of Lake Erie circa 2014 when it had a massive aerial bloom. Folks, this is a satellite picture. That's how high up this picture is being taken from. It's just zoomed in, and you can very clearly see the algal bloom in the water. This is why we want to control those nutrients. This is what happens when human activity gets out of control. In some of the previous images you see, algal blooms can generate fish kills. And I see someone ask something. Okay, you like very small clam-like organisms. Yeah, clam-like organisms, mollusks, and all the pulmonates, they can be great because they can help filter the water and they can consume some of the algae too. They aren't necessarily bad. It's just when that situation gets out of control. And the picture that I had shown you earlier, the researcher, they're working with a cyanobacterial bloom. Now, this is actually a bit of a potentially dangerous situation. If you get exposed to cyanobacteria, it can make you sick, and you may need to see a doctor or visit a hospital. But if it's occurring in your pond, it is not the end of the world. Cyanobacterial blooms are like wildfires. They burn themselves out. So oftentimes, sometimes when you get this, when it looks like someone just dumped green paint on your water, if you just wait a week or two, usually the population will crash itself out. But the trouble is that it'll often generate a fish kill. It'll decimate some of the other organisms in the pond. So this is why it's important to monitor those nutrients coming in and going out of your water. All right. So, oh yeah, I was asking a question of some high school students. Let's see if you guys can get this one. Can a plant be a secondary consumer? Can a plant be a predator? Let's see if any of you guys can answer that one. I'm curious. Or better yet, Dana, can you answer this question?
My mother used to have this in like a little swamp on our back porch. They're pitcher plants. I know it.
Yes, they absolutely are. So plants can be predators, and this is one that you will find in pond environments. Now, I most commonly found them when I worked as a researcher in Mississippi. You would see pitcher plants all over the place, and you can sometimes get them here in Indiana as well. So they are fun and they are neat. All right, guys, you probably have a lot of questions about a variety of things. Go ahead and ask them, and we'll see if we can cover things. I kind of knew that I probably wouldn't be touching on every subject you guys wanted to hit, so hit me.
I have a question, Bob.
Sure, go for it.
How do you feel about pond dye?
Dyes can be good and bad. Dyes, what they will do, when you dye something, you're blocking the sunlight in an attempt to kill some of the algae that is developing in your pond. That is not necessarily a bad thing. The trouble is that dyes are not discriminatory. They will block the sunlight to all photosynthetic organisms, including bacteria and plants. You're going to want to look at the timing of when a lot of your plant species are going to be growing, so that way you can try to avoid impeding their development as much as possible. And really, I would suggest using a dye when the algae is just going out of control, because that is one of your scorched earth methods of trying to get rid of algae, short of using an actual pesticide. Let's see, Patty asked, Patty, I'm not sure if I understand your question there. Are pitcher plants tender to our weather? Maybe you could ask that pitcher plants. Are you asking, are they related to our weather here? Like, do they like moist conditions?
I think she's saying, like, do they overwinter?
Or are they in our hardiness zone? See, I think we are a little bit above what they normally are. However, our hardiness zones have been moving, especially further south of us in Indiana. So while they're not super common here, and in previous years you probably wouldn't have found that many of them, they are getting to become probably more common, and we'll probably end up seeing more and more of them. Now, if you do see pitcher plants around your pond, don't freak out. They are not some kind of invasive. They are not something that is necessarily bad. And they may actually help you control a few of the insects and other things too. Just if you're squeamish, don't look in the pitcher plants. Unfortunately, sometimes mice can go in them too. So I would avoid doing that.
I've seen them, like a couple of years ago, I took a staycation up to the Indiana Dunes, and there was a swamp with a ton of mosquitoes, but I saw pitcher plants and I want to say Venus flytraps there as well, which surprised me because, I mean, that's pretty north, right on the Great Lakes. I mean, like cold weather, but they were definitely thriving in that environment.
Yeah, yeah. And oftentimes, a lot of times this vegetation just gets moved around due to human activity too. So sometimes they'll be able to get a foothold and then just grow. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the plant is bad. It means that we need to monitor it. All right, I'm going to look at some of these questions. Do you have any experience with manipulating lake level to control excess vegetation? Now, while I don't personally have experience doing that, I have known people who have done it. That is one of those ones where I would strongly suggest that you get a pond management agency to help you with it before you do that. They are going to be able to take a close look at what is going on in your pond and be able to help you make an informed decision on that. Or we can get you in contact with some of our specialists with Purdue Extension. There's one educator who does some of that work too, who works a lot with it, and I would rather have his opinion here before I gave you mine. So I'm just going to stick with, I would rather you get professional help before you make that kind of decision. Or contact Dana and I, and we can get you in contact with someone else who might have a better opinion than I have. Lily says we use dye in midsummer after the rains are over. If we use it in the springs, it just gets washed out before the pond gets high. Yeah, so when you use dye or any pesticide products as well, that timing is important. You don't want to use it before flood events happen. So please keep that in mind. That is very good. Will they die during harsh winter? If you're talking about the pitcher plants, I don't know their life cycle myself. I would guess most likely they overwinter as some of the other plants around here do, either through a bulb or through seeding. So most likely they'll just die back if they're a perennial, but I would want to check to see if they're a perennial or an annual before I let you know on that one. Can you recommend some native plants to put near a pond? Usually what I would suggest, I would point you towards some of the other pond management agencies again. There are some plants that are going to work well there, native plants, but unfortunately I just don't have the list immediately on me to be able to make that recommendation. Lily, I'm going to mark that down just so I can look up some kind of list and make sure that I can share it with Dana and give you something on that one. All right. And then another question, are cattails good for ponds, and what's the best way to reduce cattails? Yes and no. That's the hard part about cattails. Technically, a cattail can help stabilize the shore structure of a pond. But the problem with cattails is that they also provide terrific habitat for muskrats and other small organisms that are going to erode the shoreline conditions. In general, people just don't like cattails being there. What you can try to do is you can try to physically remove them. But it is a lot of work to do it, and it's probably going to require some machinery. Cattails' roots are very, very strong. You don't just want to bush hog them down because they will grow right back. And then if you disturb cattails, that thing that makes them be called a cattail can just explode with seeds, and you end up with a huge problem anyways. So you're going to want to probably just physically remove them as carefully as you can, stick a bag over that seed pod before you move them around. Chuck asks, how do you feel about introducing sterile grass carp? Chuck, I hope you are introducing them to your grill because you do not want them in your pond. Please, 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 please don't use them. They can escape very easily. They do not do as much good work as people believe they do. They will only consume certain plants. They will not consume a lot of the ones that are problematic. So please do not use grass carp. If you need help with it, I know a guy who actually knows a great recipe to actually turn them into something that's good to eat. But that is what I will say on that one. Do you guys have any other questions?
Okay. I wanted to say to the group that I will, at the end of this series, I'm going to have a post survey that I'm going to send out to everyone who registered. Area 5 is also planning on doing a two-part series about ponds, fish, and vegetation in June. So look for that information on our Facebook page, on the Purdue Extension website. And there's a couple of Purdue documents that I think are pretty good that when I go and look at people's ponds, I hand them those documents that I will send out with your reminder for next week. And this recordings, well, all the recordings are going to be posted on the Purdue Extension Vigo County YouTube channel. So stay tuned. Hopefully I will see you all next Tuesday at 11 a.m.
Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, and you have a good day.